I can tell you are all heroes because you've made it through these last couple of days, and you seem not to even get tired, which is pretty amazing, so I salute you for that. Today we're going to talk about a few different things, but primarily around kind of the role that culture plays in innovation. We spent the last 15 years of our work looking at different regions and wondering what makes people innovative, why do people start companies, what is it that regions can do to support themselves. So we're going to try to make this a little fun. We're going to try to make you think a little bit, and so hopefully this will kind of get you energized. And we're calling this Architecting the Invisible. And the reason we call it this is because when we get people coming to California, they come to Stanford University and they go to the Silicon Valley, what they actually see happening around them is actually only 1% of what makes innovation happen. The other 99% is invisible to the naked eye. So what we're going to do here is just peel back a little bit of that invisibility and kind of show you exactly what it is that makes it a wonderful place and how other places are making themselves special, like Colombia. So one of the challenges of trying to build innovation ecosystems, as we call it, is they're highly chaotic. Entrepreneurs are chaotic by nature, but the very communities and systems that they work in are very chaotic. And what's interesting is that without order, nothing can exist, but without chaos, nothing can evolve. And this has kind of been a very important point to get across at the beginning. And as I go through, I'm going to start off by giving you a little bit of my background. And then once you kind of learn a little bit about me, you'll see why I'm just as crazy as the rest of you. So I was very fortunate. I grew up on the beaches of Southern California, near Los Angeles. And although you see this kind of kid who's smiling and looks pretty happy and looks very innocent, I was anything but innocent. I was a bit of a terror as a small child. And part of the reason I was a terror is because I was always asking my parents this question: why? And it was amazing because I was just curious. I'm the person who would take things apart just to see what was inside of them. And that curiosity still exists with me today. In fact, in some ways, I'm even more curious today than I was. Living on the beaches of Southern California, not a hard life. We surfed during the day. We studied. I was actually on the surf team at my university. Studied. And I went to the University of California, San Diego, where I still teach and I work. So it's been a wonderful kind of lifelong pattern. And while I was there, I studied three things. So I studied biochemistry because my parents wanted me to be a doctor. I studied music because that was actually my passion. I was a musician. And for those of you who are here for John's talk, I was a jazz musician. And so I really kind of like that ability to improv and the musicality of it. But I also studied economics. And the reason for that was, well, I had to choose a third elective and figured economics could always serve me well. Little did I know that several years forward that I would be able to use all three of these disciplines in my work. It was not because I was a pure Renaissance person or I had some desire to expand myself. It's just that I wanted to give myself choices. And what we've learned is that power is all about having options. And I wanted to give myself options in life. So as soon after college, I decided to travel the world. I'd been studying for too long, and I decided to travel, and I ended up living in Japan for a short period of time. And then I went to work for a company called Berkshire Hathaway. Some of you may know it because it's owned by Mr. Warren Buffett. And I worked in the operating companies, and it was a wonderful experience of how to run a company. But the companies were very linear. Goods came in the back door to collaborate and take risks. Why wasn't more of that happening? And more importantly, why are there so many gaps between what we as organizations know what we should do and what we actually do? And more importantly, why do so many of these organizations fail to implement the experience and knowledge that they've worked so hard to acquire? And that really bothered me. And it wasn't until I met with a colleague at Stanford University who said, Rather than me giving you the answer, I'm going to have you discover it for yourself. And he gave me a book called The Knowing-Doing Gap by Pfeffer and Sutton. And it says, well, that's easy, because there's a big gap between knowing what to do and then doing it. And I said, well, gosh, I wonder why that happened. And the reason is because knowing what to do exists up here in your head. Doing something exists in your fingertips. And something amazing happens in between. Your heart. And very often your heart gets in the way. We're going to explore exactly why that happens and how to kind of fix that network. So now we're going to move again. And now we're going to go back even further in time. All of our organizational behavior actually began here on the plains and the savannas of Africa. And it was really in our familiar units, the tribes, that we first learned about collective intelligence for the greater good. And we could take our knowledge for the first time and grow crops, the agrarian economies, where we could use our knowledge and feed everybody. And believe it or not, this model was scalable, because we also figured out how to then domesticate cattle and eventually harness the natural resources around us. And we called this productivity. And really all economic progress hasn't really changed that much. We have a set of inputs into the process, we add value to them, and out what comes out the back end, hopefully, is of more value than what went in the front end. But the ingredients for innovation are great ideas, people, money, and physical resources. But what's fundamentally different about what happened 100 or 200 years ago and today is that the recipe has changed a bit. The ingredients haven't changed, but the recipe has changed. And we wanted to kind of look at a new field of innovation economics. And what this slide says, it says, economics is the science of explaining tomorrow why the predictions you made yesterday didn't come true today. So it's an inexact science, and we're spending too much time, thinking about the future, trying to predict the future, when really we focus on the present and really how to make it work today. But there's an amazing thing. Remember I said that the heart gets in the way? The human beings are an amazing species. We're the only species with the ability for what is called prospective thought. We can actually think about the future. We can dream about the future. We can imagine different scenarios in the future. And we can actually change our behavior in the present to manifest that future. We can use our desires to change what actually happens. And of course, we can specialize. This is the other ingredient of economic productivity, that I can do something well, you can do something well, and we can trade those specialties. I'm very fortunate because I don't have to grow my own food or sew my own clothes anymore. I can actually trade my specialty for that. And in addition, then we can create markets in which to do that. And the combination of these three things have really allowed for us to be productive. But the rules of engagement have changed. And fundamentally, what dominated the industrial era was an asymmetry of knowledge and resources. The reason I was able to be successful is because I had more than you. And I could trade that and assert that over you to make money. But as I said, in the 21st century, what we're seeing is technology has created a huge democratization. We now all have access to relatively the same amount of information looking on Google. And so the same competitive advantages that existed before no longer exist. And we're trying to grapple with that. And it doesn't just happen with information in Google. It happens with using a taxi now. We can drive Uber. We've now democratized this. And we see a number of things like Square, where we've democratized payment. And I love these technologies. In fact, these are the things we invest in as investors. But everyone's trying to grapple with how do we remain relevant and competitive when the rules have changed? So we created this model to describe what we were observing. And we call this first model the plantation model. And I was reading a paper called The Image of Limited Good. And what it said is there's only so much good in the world. Full stop. Good people, good food, good land, probably most importantly, good wine. And the race is on, because if you have it, I don't. And it becomes a zero-sum game. More importantly, we create mindsets of scarcity. So if I have an apple and you have an orange, and we decide to share them with everyone in this room, we have to slice it pretty thin to feed everybody. In fact, as we begin eating the apple and the orange, what happens? Our resources go to zero because we've now consumed them. That's a pretty scary thought, because then it puts us into the consciousness of we better be very careful how we use these resources. And that's why we call these plantation models, and that's why they look very, very linear. In fact, this is a vineyard not far from our office in the Bay Area. And the first thing you notice about it is how pretty it looks, because it's highly linear. And the reason it's linear is because it's efficient. When we run our irrigation to water the crops, we just run it down the middle. We waste as little water as possible. And everything we do, all of our knowledge, goes into the process of what we're trying to do. In fact, when you look at this picture, you know exactly what it is we're trying to do. But if a weed grows up in our field, we have to pull it out, because it competes for the very resources we're trying to protect. So anything that's unplanned is not good. So at the end of the day, we probably have really good wine, but we don't have anything creative or innovative. And of course, we've applied this model over and over and over again, from the production lines in the automobile industry, to the military and industrial complex, to even how we make chips today. Looks pretty much the same, highly linear, and we're getting pretty good at it. But we saw a different model forming, which is the knowledge and creative models. And what was different, remember in the apple and the orange example, that as we share, it goes down to zero? Knowledge works on a mindset of abundance. So if you and I meet together in a coffee shop and I have an idea, and you have an idea, and we share those ideas, we now each have 2 ideas. And if each of us were to do this in the room, imagine how many ideas we would generate. And imagine if the entire city of Medellin did this, or the country of Colombia did this, or the world did this. How much capacity we would create. So it's interesting that the more resources you contribute to the system, the greater the capacity, which is exactly the opposite of what we did. And when I read this book, The Rational Optimist, it was a huge, huge relief, because now I know what causes innovation to happen. Innovation is all about the ideas that have sex. And I said, I know what my job is. My job is to promote promiscuity and to help build the brothels of innovation. That's really kind of our new job. And we call these new models rainforests. And the reason is, they're kind of chaotic and beautiful. When you look at this, yes, they're lush and green, but if I asked you, what is the purpose? What is the goal? What are we trying to produce? You couldn't tell me. We're not even sure where our eyes are supposed to focus. And what's interesting is probably the most important thing in that rainforest, you're standing on, the weeds. And what's interesting is Google was a weed. Every venture capital firm in the Silicon Valley initially passed on the opportunity to work with Google. Everyone had said search had been optimized. There were companies like Yahoo and Alta Vista working on search. And the business model of advertising revenue, that's just dumb. And this plays out over and over again. In fact, not only do these business ideas look really strange, the people who work with these ideas are really strange. There's an interview with Arthur Rock, one of the very famous venture capitalists, who helped create the entire industry. And he talks about the first time he met Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, who you're going to meet tomorrow. And he said, wow, when you first meet these two, it's really different. He said, they don't seem very appealing. You know, they tend to have a bit hard side to them, a bit arrogant. They don't look like leaders. And in fact, one of them, Steve Jobs, actually smells a bit funny. So everything, not only are they leaders, but they almost look like anti-leaders. So not only do the ideas look weird, but the people associated with them often look weird. So would you invest in this startup? Most people would say no. But of course, if you did, you'd miss the opportunity to work with young Bill Gates. And this plays out over and over again. So don't be afraid of weird people. Of course, of which I'm one of them. So there's a basic paradox of innovation. And I'll share that with you today. And that paradox is that innovation is only measured once it becomes imitation. It's only validated once other people begin imitating it. So you can't call yourself innovative. You can't even call what you're doing innovation until the market tells you it's innovation. All you can do is say, I've got a creative or a unique approach, or I think we do, and eventually the market will determine it. So this is what makes it so hard for our work, because we want to invest in innovation. We want to create more innovation, but we don't know really what is innovation. So what we've learned is that you can't make innovation happen, but you can increase the chances that it will happen. Two things: by creating the right conditions under which it can flourish, and be creating the right external forces to make it happen. And of course, we always miss what is innovative. So this is a copy of a telegram, or an internal memo from Western Union around the telephone. It says, the telephone has too many shortcomings to be seriously considered as a means of communication. The device is inherently of no use to us, or no value to us. And this plays out over and over again when we were told that by Lord Kelvin that heavier than air flying machines are impossible. Now the reason I'm showing you a couple of these examples is because these weren't just the general public that was saying this, these were the experts, the people who had the knowledge and the resources to supposedly know what was the next big thing. And of course, there's no reason for any individual to have a computer in their home. That's just silly. And of course, we can't imagine living without it. And this was, this statement was from Ken Olsen from DEC. So again, this plays out over and over and over again. That is why when I meet with an entrepreneur, I have never in my career told an entrepreneur he has a dumb idea. Because chances are that dumb idea that I'm talking about is going to be Google. And what's interesting, in order for us to achieve that and to get ourselves to that place of innovation, it requires a lot more than knowledge. In fact, knowledge can often limit us. It really requires imagination, because it's often about what hasn't yet been done. And so we've got to use our brains and our creativity. So how can we truly make innovation happen? Well, one way, build coffee houses. Build places to get together. Really, you know what entrepreneurs need? They need caffeine, they need electricity, and their computer. And they can create amazing things. And they need other people to share these ideas with. So create the new coffee houses of the world. Now this was a big epiphany that I had, and this actually came from a conversation with a gentleman named Sanjay Jha. Sanjay Jha was the CEO of Motorola, their mobility unit. And he could not understand why people loved their iPhones so much. To him, it was an inferior piece of technology. In fact, Motorola, before the iPhone, owned the market with their Razr. So he gave the phone, the iPhone, to his engineers and said, figure out what is so special about this device. And at the time, they were creating the first Android platform, the Droid. So he gave it to his engineers. They indeed took it apart. They indeed created a new phone. They released it as the Droid, and nobody wanted it. Certainly not to the extent that people for iPhone. People would rather wait in line or wait 2 weeks to get a new iPhone than buy a Droid, which was actually had superior specifications on it in almost every way. And it just flabbergasted him. He said, why would people do that? And then it dawned on him several years later. He said, because as an engineer, he saw everything as an engineering problem. And design was only what you had to do to put it in a form to give it to people. Steve Jobs, on the other hand, saw everything as a design challenge that could then be engineered. Because if he could make products that made people love using them, they would do whatever they could to stay loyal to you. And what they ended up creating was a religion of Apple. And I wrote a paper on this a year ago. And I just asked the simple question, is how did Steve Jobs get everyone in the world to act like his employee without having to pay them? Because you talk to Apple loyalists and they treat it like a religion. They won't hear of anything else, and anything you say is just dumb. And they approach the same with the same sincerity, the same caring that his own employees do. People who create applications, people who create cases for Apple, treat it with the same care. You certainly do not see that in the Microsoft world. And so people have been fascinated. So we asked the question, can we engineer serendipity through, by weaving together different ideas? And what was interesting about this is we realized, whereas in the first model, the plantation, it was about engineering of process. The plantation was about engineering of the environment, trying to engineer serendipity. How do we get people colliding? How do we get innovation, ideas to have sex? So we went back to design thinking. We work with our colleagues at Stanford University, and most of you are aware of design thinking, so we won't spend much time on this. But basically, we take cues from the world around us, and then we create prototypes and designs that we think people will use, and we kind of follow them closely and see what they like. And of course, design is all around us, everything from the furniture we sit on to the buildings, and even the cities we live in. But we had a question about design thinking, and that's what deep thinking is. And that was, well, we know how to design objects. We certainly know how to design buildings. We're getting better at designing cities. The question is, can you design a society? Can you use the exact same thinking that we use to design tangible products to design something more intangible? And the answer is yes. And so we use these tools, in this case, we call it the rainforest canvas, to do it. And we go into a region and we sequence its genome. We try to understand what makes it tick. Because you can't replicate Silicon Valley, nor should you. You basically want to build the best Colombia you can. It's not a race, it's not a competition. It's about living up to your genetic potential. And so we go in to figure out what is it that you're really good at and how can we help make it better. And we use a design methodology, which as you will see, we use this format of the business model generation canvas, and we use the rainforest canvas. And what we do is we put in all the elements that we think make a successful community, and then as I say, we ask lots of questions. And if people think that we ask good questions, it's only because we've asked really bad questions. And we've been doing this a while, so hopefully we're getting a little bit better at it. And we've done this around the world, and our book's been translated into 6 languages, but we're still not satisfied because this is an evolutionary process. This is by no means a destination. It's always a journey. And so we've done it in places like Italy. And what's nice about our process is it's not about just a bunch of interviews, it's about us getting off our butts and the people who we work with getting off that and having conversations and building things together. In fact, this is actually a route de N. And these are ones we've done in Bogota. And we believe even our furniture in our office you can write on. You can write on the walls, you can write on the chairs in our office. And we put on a big global innovation summit every year where close to 1,000 people from 50 countries come to basically share this experience. And we design together, and we do a massive parallel design sessions to design your own ecosystem, whether it's a company, whether it's a community, or whether it's a country. And so really this statement about what we do is just a lot of big words. What we like to do is we like to change communities by driving cultural change. And this was kind of an epiphany for us because as we talk to leaders, whether it's of companies or communities, they always have the same goal. We want more of the positive type of outcome. Maybe jobs, it may be more revenue. And then they said, what are the actions we have to make that happen? So if it's in the case of a community, we need more venture funds, we need incubators, we need programs like Connect and Impulsa and others that support innovation. And that's usually where they tend to focus. What we realized, though, is we wanted to deconstruct this and say, actually all actions stem from behaviors. And our behaviors stem from our motivations and our attitudes, but ultimately it comes down to our beliefs. What is it that we believe? Because if I believe something to be true, I'm more than likely to act on that belief. And this is really where we should focus, because if we can make this happen, we can do anything. And there's a wonderful saying that says, for those who believe, no evidence is necessary, but for those who do not, no evidence will ever suffice. And so that's really kind of our mantra going forward. So what does it really take for us to believe in something? Well, again, remember I told you that our heart gets in the way? Well, even when we do think about the future of being an entrepreneur, building a company, very often our heart's telling us, danger, danger. If I do this activity, I may lose all my money, I may lose my reputation, I may lose my social standing. There's so many things that can go wrong. It can be overwhelming. And fear can set in, and what does it do? It paralyzes us. So it's just, we want to optimize our own well-being, so we won't do something. And yet, all these things that we thought about could happen haven't even happened yet. So the brain can play tricks on us. And it can work in a very positive way too, because think about it when you buy a lottery ticket. In the US, our lottery is a big deal, and people spend millions, if not billions of dollars every year buying lottery tickets. And what's interesting is when you buy a lottery ticket, you know intellectually you probably have no chance at all of doing it. But in that moment you buy the lottery ticket, your brain begins thinking about all the wonderful things you're going to do with that money. Retiring, buying a car, buying a home, financial security, and in that moment you feel better, you feel good. That's pretty amazing. Something that hasn't even happened yet can change your mood. So what we realize is the real secret to innovation entrepreneurship is not fear, but it's actually hope. Believing that there's something better out there, believing that you can make something happen. And it's really hope that drives what we want to do. So our feeling is, how do we get from the negative emotions on the left to the positive emotions on our right? And that's where our work primarily centers. Because really, believing is about connecting what happens up here and what we feel here. And it's that thinking and feeling that drives our belief system. Oh, and there's one more thing that it takes. It takes a leap of faith, which is that courage to actually step forward and actually take what you believe to be true and actually make it happen. And very often you've got to go from one place to another to do that. So this is just a more intellectual way of saying the exact same thing. Down in the lower left is where you sit on your rear end and you study books and papers, and up on the right is where you get out in the world and interact with it. And that's where all the good stuff happens. Oh, and you can make lots of money doing this too. The reason you pay so much money for a coffee at Starbucks isn't because the coffee is better than what you make at home. It's because there's an experience there that you appreciate and you're willing to pay for it. And the personal models, the organizational models have to change as well. We need to move away from a model, what we call ecosystems, to models of ecosystems. And really what that refers to is, on the left you have a typical hierarchical structure. You're all used to seeing this. It comes from military paradigms and command and control, and it's perfect in the plantation models because it allocates resources very efficiently. They're status and permission-driven models, and so wherever you sit in that side, you know exactly where you are. And even if you really don't, the people above and below you will remind you where you are. But the model on the right, the ecosystem, is what we're trying to build here in Colombia, which is every person matters, and every person has an equal and important role in what happens in the outcome. So it's more like a play you go to. When the actor steps on his line and his cue and begins speaking his line, at that moment, that actor is the only thing that matters and is the most important person in the play. So it's not a matter of title, it's a matter of timing. And that is really the role of innovation. So as we said, it's the ingredients are pretty much the same, but the recipe is different. So we pay attention to the culture. And how do you kind of change behavior and culture to drive innovation? Well, here's a good tip. Don't think like an economist. If you think like a psychologist, you'll be much better off. If you can give people purpose and meaning to their life, they'll follow you anywhere. If you gave them the paycheck, they'll work for the paycheck. What Maya Angelou said, she said that I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So remember that. And in doing so, but I was restless, because after a while, I just got bored. You can only predict and repeat so much. So then, I went to the Silicon Valley. My mentor at Berkshire Hathaway funded a company in the Silicon Valley that I went to run. It was a lot of fun, and the most wonderful thing happened. We got lucky. We were able to exit the company well, and one of the lessons learned, which was one of my first lessons in business, is it's always better to be lucky than smart, but you better know the difference. And so I know the difference, we got lucky. But then we were able to take that to the next level. I was then hired by a venture capital firm that had invested in our company, and as an entrepreneur in residence. And what that meant, they gave me a desk, a checkbook, and a hunting license. They told me to go out and find the next big company. And a friend of mine was starting a company that I thought was really interesting. And we invested in that company, and it did really well. We took the company public. Today it does about $3 billion a year in business, in sustainable growth, and that gave me, again, some new choices, some new options to myself. And what I did is I took some time off and came back to San Diego, where I went to school, and began working with a local business accelerator called Connect. And Connect existed to help link entrepreneurs to critical resources like capital and mentorship and customer introductions. And after 2000, it was really interesting because after the dot-com implosion, a lot of regions were trying to figure out how to copy the Silicon Valley. So they made trips to the Silicon Valley in Boston, and eventually they came to San Diego, because whereas the Silicon Valley and Boston were these large organic places that grew up over time, San Diego was a small town with a lot of people in it. And it had a history of defense, tourism, real estate, and through a crisis in the 80s was able to turn that around to becoming one of the world's top centers in wireless technologies and biotechnology. And everyone wanted to know, how did you do that? How did you change your destiny? How did you change your own genetic code for this? And so we started Global Connect, because a lot of people wanted to copy the Connect model. After Michael Porter had written a series of case studies on clusters, and he had focused on our program and our region, and really thought it was a best practice model. But one of my concerns with places wanting to copy the model was what I had observed is that success and innovation had more to do with culture than it did with process. Yes, process is definitely important, and you need it because it helps create efficiency and it helps you do things in a predictable, repeatable manner. But more importantly, what we found was it wasn't that places like the Silicon Valley and Boston and Israel and even San Diego or Austin, it's not that we had smarter people. It's not that we had more money. What was fundamentally different is that there was a belief system in place that seemed to be different. So I set up Global Connect really to study how innovation happens. And eventually we grew this program, Global Connect, to 25 programs, 57 programs in 25 countries around the world. And we have a program right here in Colombia, in Bogota, and we're looking to expand that. While we were growing Global Connect, I always felt working in a nonprofit for me was a little bit like being a carnivore in a vegetarian restaurant. So you know it's good for you and you know it's healthy, but somehow you just want that steak. So we set up our venture fund, T2 Ventures, to invest in some of these promising companies and entrepreneurs that we were seeing around the world as we were working, even places like here in Colombia. And this was very satisfying because we could do good and do well at the same time. And we really liked that. And of course, in meeting all these people around the world, we were able to build our social networks. And that was really important because I got to meet really cool people and actually work with some really cool entrepreneurs. And now I was fulfilling my passion. But as remember, I'm an annoying child, I'm not much better as an adult, and I still ask a lot of questions. And so, one of the questions I had when all these regions would come to us is, if we've been writing about innovation for so long, for 20 plus years, and it's not only us, it's people like Michael Porter and Clay Christensen, have been fail small, but evolve rapidly. So do lots of little experiments, do them in parallel. Don't be afraid, again, living in the present, do things in the present, and take that knowledge of what you're learning and use it to move forward and to better yourself. And remember that mistakes don't define us, they refine us. So don't be afraid of failure. Now, what we do is one of the first steps we have to do, and this will be important in Colombia, and this is the work, in fact, we launched a project today, is the difference between implicit and explicit. So when people come to the Silicon Valley, what you do is you see a lot of implicit behaviors. You see people sharing and giving. You see people paying it forward. And that's an odd concept for a lot of cultures. Why would someone give me something and not expect anything in return? Whether it was their time, their money, some connection? That just doesn't make any sense. And the reason is there's an implicit social contract that occurs in the Valley. Again, we talked about all the invisible stuff. Well, that's one of them. So you have to make implicit behaviors explicit. So we create what are called the social contracts to do that. So how many of you know what this is? So this is the Hewlett-Packard garage. This is where HP started. This is where the term garage started. And 80 years ago, Hewlett-Packard created their social contract. And it was unusual for the time, and it's still as relevant today as it was 80 years ago. And it says, believe you can change the world. Work quickly, keep the tools unlocked, and work whenever. Know when to work alone and when to work together. Share tools, ideas, and trust your colleagues. It's the first time we see this word trust, and it becomes such an important theme in building culture. No politics and no bureaucracy. These are ridiculous in a garage. So they're saying that in a startup, there's no rule for hierarchy or bureaucracy in that. The customer defines a job well done. Again, the market will determine what's innovative and useful. You will not. Radical ideas are not bad ideas. Invent different ways of working. So it's not just about inventing products. Invent different ways of collaborating and engaging with one another. Make a contribution every day. And if it doesn't contribute, it does not leave the garage. And believe together that we can do anything. And go ahead and invent. This was so important that Carly Fiorina, the CEO at the time of Hewlett-Packard, brought this out, and this is still in purpose today. So every group we work with, we start with the social contract. Because what we've learned is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. The best strategy in your company doesn't matter if you don't have the right culture. Companies like Google and Facebook spend a tremendous amount of time trying to get the culture right and the behavior right. Here's something that needs to happen before you can become innovative. So for those of you in entrepreneurial startups, you have to be comfortable with a little ambiguity, with things that aren't clear. And by the way, you have to be comfortable, a little uncomfortable at the same time. It's the only place where things happen. The truth is that our finest moments are most likely to occur when we're feeling deeply uncomfortable, unhappy, or unfulfilled. For it is only in such moments, propelled by our discomfort, that we are likely to step out of our ruts and start searching for different ways or truer answers. So being uncomfortable produces some pretty good stuff. Also, if you want to explore and create disruptive new ideas, the best people to bring in the room are those who are uninformed and intelligent. Because diversity and independence are important because the best collective decisions are not the product of disagreement in contest, not consensus or compromise. And the other thing we realized too when we talk to entrepreneurs is, I talked to a group for this new book of 100 entrepreneurs, and I asked them, if you could take all the knowledge you have today and go back to the beginning of your company, what might you do differently? And I was shocked at the answer because I wasn't prepared for it. And 80% of them said, I would not have started my company. Because if I would have known all the impossible things I would have had to go through, I probably would not have done it. So it's not that they think outside the box. For them, the box just doesn't exist. They don't think about boundaries, only obstacles. And so what we're seeing is really a new paradigm emerging. Remember when I said I worked at Berkshire Hathaway and it was all about predicting and repeating? Well, now it's all about learning and adapting. It's not about the orthodoxy of what you do, it's about the orthopraxy. We follow people who practice what they say they're going to do. That is far more appealing than someone who just does not. Planning versus modeling. We don't know what the future holds, so the best we can do is have good guesses about it and then learn from the feedback we get from those. It's not about eliminating risk, it's about managing it. The best opportunities we've invested in are those that are a bit risky. In fact, one of my good friends and colleagues in Silicon Valley, Tim Draper, said that when they get together with their weekly staff meetings, he said when one of the partners presents a new idea and they all begin agreeing, that's when he knows it's not going to be very successful. He says the best companies they've invested in is when one or two partners really like the idea and the other ones say it's the absolute dumbest idea they've ever heard. And that was the case of Skype. Everyone on his team hated Skype. They thought it was just the dumbest idea and they didn't know why he was spending time doing it. And not worrying about failing, but failing fast and failing, hopefully, inexpensive. And so these are the tools we use to actually build these rainforests. So you can learn by doing. Don't spend too much time trying to predict the future and trying to figure out every scenario. Get out in the world and learn by doing. Create diversity in your working groups, because the more diversity, the more chances you're going to have for the right kinds of perspectives, and that will help you achieve success. Celebrate your role models. Tell your stories of the people that are doing the great things and that you aspire to. Our culture in the US, which I don't want to pretend has to be the culture here or will be the culture, but we love our role models because we want to get up every day saying, I can do what he did. In fact, I think I can do it better than he did. But you need to tell your stories. Tribes of trust. Trust one another and give trust based on candor and care. Create social feedback loops. So when you do things, get feedback on what you're doing. And make these social contracts we talked about explicit. And so the final thing we're going to talk about are the rules of the rainforest. Break the rules and dream. It's interesting. People kind of look at that in their first shot. But we find that good entrepreneurs have a certain set of characteristics. You know, they're highly persistent, they've got wonderful imagination, they're flexible, but they're also a bit naughty. They don't walk down the center of the road. They bend the rules. So don't be afraid of that. But also, open doors for others and listen to what they do. Trust and be trustworthy. Experiment together. Don't do it necessarily on your own. Seek fairness, not advantage, which is my personal favorite. Because before, when I was telling you we worked in Berkshire Hathaway, we were always trying to buy low, sell high, trying to get the best deal. In the innovation space, we need to form partnerships because we don't know what's going to happen. And if I have not incentivized you to work with me, it's not going to be successful. But if we are fair with one another, we have the better chance. And of course, pay it forward. And so it really comes down to these three things. Do what you absolutely do. Do it with commitment and do it with passion. And you have the chance to be successful. But most importantly, believe in yourself. Because you can change the world and you're the only one who can. Thank you.